Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy Jack Slack, the poorly scripted boxing press conference of people, and we're coming at you on Wednesday the 12th of July with a load of great fights to recap, some shit show stuff going on in the MMA news and the boxing news because those have become closely related this week, and some other stuff to look forward to. Going to do a couple of books of the week this week because I've been digging out some classics. And we'll be previewing the event this weekend in Glasgow, which actually isn't bad, given that it's a UK event. If it were held in Edinburgh, I'd go watch it. Oh, we're going to have some angry Glaswegians in the comments. Let's jump right into the news. Biggest MMA news this week, if we exclude the entire Mayweather-McGregor shit show for the moment, the biggest pure MMA news this week was the loss of Gegard Mousasi to Bellator. The UFC did not reach terms with Gegard, and he's now in Coca Force, wherein there is no one for him to fight. I tweeted about this shortly after it was announced. I said, which 5 Bellator middleweights could you not wait to see Mousasi fight? They'll have him fight Cavallo, he'll win, and then he'll be their champion. People were giving me all sorts, like, oh, you could do Manhoff versus Mousasi 2, think how good that would be. And I was like, no, I saw the first one, I know exactly how good that would not be. And I've seen Melvin Manhoff getting starched more and more lately. And then someone suggested Joe Schilling, like, if they stood and bang, how interesting would that be? And I said, watch the Manhoff fight, watch the Mark Hunt fight. Gegard Mousasi, as good as he was when he took on Kotaro in kickboxing, he's not the kind of guy who's going to stand and bang just for your entertainment. He's going to easily take down Joe Schilling from the opening bell and pound him into unconsciousness, or submit him, probably the first. It's like when they booked 42-year-old Sakuraba to fight Shinya Aoki. And everyone was like, well, yeah, they'll have a gentleman's agreement and they'll just grapple. They're like, no, that won't happen. It's MMA, you dick. Or when Phil Baroni fought that boxer, what's his name, Nishimura? Really, really slick boxer, actually, that Pride brought in. But because it was Pride, they fed him to the wolves right from the start. So they gave him, like, Mark Hunt, I think Cyborg Santos, just a load of guys who had tons more experience than him when he had no MMA fights. But Baroni took him down and submitted him quickly. Anyway, that's interesting at least. Lots of people saying that he could go back up to light heavyweight. That is Bellator's most interesting class except welterweight at the moment. Because you got Bader, Davis, McGeary, Vassell, King Mo, who they're still desperately trying to push. Rampage, if he can cut weight again. Actually, Rampage versus Mousasi wouldn't be a bad matchup. I would watch that. Well, depends what else is on, but I would probably watch that. Could make the King Mo rematch, but unless it's for a title, Bellator will make it 3 rounds, and then you got the problem of him just laying all over him again. At any rate, very strange decision by the UFC to let Mousasi go, especially as he just started to come into his own. You know, previously Mousasi was a very hit-and-miss character. Weidman, easily the biggest win of his career, well-respected opponent, highly ranked in the middleweight division, and Gegard, well, aside from the controversial ending, he was beginning to take him apart at the end. And it seems like we've been, for the best part of a decade, being like, oh, wait till Gegard Mousasi turns up to the actual fight this time. But no, I hope he does well in Bellator. To be honest, if he went over to Bellator and lost, that would be the best thing that could ever happen for whoever beat him, or Bellator generally. Carvalho, maybe. I do like Carvalho, but, that first Manhoff fight was a sleeper, and they're really not doing a great job of selling him. Like, you don't really see much stuff about Carvalho. So much so that I could be mispronouncing his name. This is the Fights Gone By podcast, of course I am. What else? Oh, Nunes versus Shevchenko was cancelled immediately before UFC. Was it 213? UFC 213? That was the headliner, but I don't think too many people were treating it as the biggest fight on the card. The people's headliner was probably Romero versus Whittaker, because you got two of the very best fighters in the world in any division meeting for an interim in air quotes, because we can probably consider it the actual middleweight title, given that the actual middleweight title hasn't been fought for against an actual middleweight since Rockhold lost it to Bisping in July of last year. But there were some people who were tweeting me and hitting me up saying, oh, this card's just awful now. to be honest, I always treated like there are very. Gegard Mousasi said this week too. He was like, people don't want to watch women's MMA. I'm not going to say that, but I am going to say there are a few stars in WMMA who I really enjoy watching. But generally, and this isn't anything to do with their gender, it's more to do with the fact that they haven't been around in the big leagues as long, but generally the standard is lower in the women's divisions than it is in the top end of the men's divisions that have been in the UFC for like 2 decades. Nunes versus Shevchenko is one that had me excited, but I'm not going to be, losing too much sleep over that. They'll just rebook it another time. The sad thing was that TMZ immediately came out and said the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with Nunes, which, for one, which of those doctors is telling you that? That's like a violation of the Hippocratic Oath right off the bat. But yeah, TMZ does work with the UFC, I believe, so it could have just been smearing their already fairly disliked champion. But that's just such bullshit. Like, Amanda Nunes, I mean, yes, she made a big payday against Ronda Rousey back in December, but she hasn't had a payday in 2017 yet. She's not just going to drop out of this fight, and then, even if she gets back into camp, like, in 2 days' time, she'll get maybe one fight in for the rest of the year, and it's not going to be a big payday like Rousey. When people pull out of fights, and others jump in to be like, well, she was clearly scared, or faking it, or whatever, it boggles my mind. These people don't get paid if they don't fight. You're better off, even if you think you're going to lose, turning up, giving it your best shot and losing, because then at least you get your show money. But fight fans love that whole so-and-so is scared, so-and-so is ducking thing. You do notice a lot more champions pulling out of fights generally, but I feel like that's probably to do with you are already at the top of the heap. You're not going to lose out as badly as if you are on your way up. And, probably making bigger paydays generally. Anyway, I think if all MMA fighters were paid as champions or treated as well as some of the champions, or had the exposure of the champions, you'd see a lot more pullouts just generally. But people were talking about the pullout rate now. It's something like, I think almost every card in the last year has been affected by either a main event or co-main event switch up. And that's what happened. I mean, I said this 2 years ago or whatever. That's what happens if you take steroids out of, or you try as best as you can to take steroids out of sports. Or performance-enhancing drugs, generally, not just steroids. A lot of the stuff that was being used was for recovery. It wasn't guys coming in with roid strength juiced up to the eyeballs because, you still have to pass the test on the night or in the days leading up to. But anyway, let's not get into steroids rant. It was quite sad that fight was cancelled, but I'm sure they'll remake it, so no need to be too upset. We'll just assume that. Well, I don't know. Would it affect the sales of the pay-per-view? Because I think most people were considering Romero versus Whittaker the main event of that. It'll be interesting to see because they've been struggling to break even 300,000 lately with any kind of regularity. Other news, Frank Mir was released by the UFC. That was an interesting one because Frank has been company man number 1 since very early on. The UFC heavyweight division, when Frank Mir was in it at the beginning, was an absolute shambles. You had Frank Mir, who was already turning into like a decent, legitimate fighter, fighting guys like Tank Abbott, while in Pride, you had Krokop, Fedor, Josh Barnett, Nogueira, and all the old guys like Coleman and Randleman running around. For a very long time, Pride had the monopoly on the heavyweight division, basically, and it was Frank Mir, Andrei Arlovsky, and Tim Sylvia basically keeping the UFC division alive. I think he's had all but like one of his fights in the UFC. So actually, maybe it was. I can't remember if it was his debut when he submitted was it Roberto Travon, the BJJ guy? Submitted him in his first UFC fight. It might have been his first MMA fight, but he has been with them for a very long time. So it's nice that the UFC has released him when he was asking for it for quite a long time. Because what's going to happen is that he'll go to Ryzen or Bellator. He'll be able to use performance enhancers a little bit more liberally than he would be if he wanted to use them in the UFC. Not going to get in trouble for saying that because we're all quite happy with Krokop going over to Ryzen, putting on like 20 pounds of muscle and looking much quicker. He said he wants to fight Fedor. When are people going to stop buying these Fedor fights? Fedor is so far past it now. Anyway, I wish Frank Mir the best of luck in his future pursuits. I wasn't really enjoying watching him towards the end, but if you want to put him in with someone like Minakov, just to get actually, maybe not fair, because I really want to see Minakov in against a current heavyweight now. But if you want to put him in with someone like Bigfoot on the outside of the UFC, fair enough. Sell out some regional shows. Final piece of news. Actually, no, I've got a little bit more. But final piece of news regarding MMA. Verdum is going to appeal his loss to Overeem. Spoilers. Not really going to be talking about that fight later. Wasn't tremendously interesting. But he's going to appeal the loss based on not liking the decision. Nothing tremendously controversial happened. He just didn't like the decision. Good luck with that. I hope the charge to do that isn't tremendously big, because you're going to lose the money. Anyway, and then elsewhere, the press conference between Mayweather and McGregor went ahead. I caught up on the highlights and I read the fallout from it, but I'll be honest, when I had to write this book about McGregor, for about 3 months, I watched everything he's ever said in any press conference ever. If anyone is bored of that guy's shtick, and it's an entertaining shtick, but I am bored of it, and I could not bring myself to watch this whole thing. But the general consensus was it was overly scripted, it felt cringy, and people didn't like the fact that, unlike a UFC press conference, it wasn't a back and forth. You know, that banter that everyone said was going to be the highlight, you know. Why would you buy it for $100? Oh, but the build-up will be amazing. But that didn't happen, because it was one guy talked and then the other. And it was very obvious that Conor McGregor is being limited in what he's allowed to say. You know, nothing about the domestic violence or anything like that came up. They talked about tax, but it seems clear that for McGregor to even be here doing this, there have been a lot of things agreed. He, you know, briefly threatened to choke him, but you know, that's the sort of stuff that sells more buys than anything. It's just controversy for, you know, it's imaginary controversy. He's not really going to choke Floyd Mayweather, especially if, as Dana White says, there are things in the contract prohibiting or punishing him for attempting, I think they said grappling, which is interesting because depending on how strictly the referee, which will probably be Kenny Bayless, but depending on how strictly the referee interprets that, depends on whether Mayweather is just, well, every Mayweather fight at the moment is just, if he grabs a clinch, that's it, break, move away. No one's ever given the chance to dig their head in, get their arms free and start banging. You know, McGregor would be the kind of guy who actually does know how to free his arms because he spends lots of his time wall wrestling. But if that's grappling, you know, then suddenly that's not allowed. The one thing that every boxer should have been trying to do against Mayweather to begin with, it's not allowed. But we're talking about the fight now. We don't need to talk about the fight. We're talking about the build-up. I liked McGregor's suit for this fight. It said "fuck you" in tiny letters. The stripes on his suit were made up of "fuck yous." Mayweather turned up in a tracksuit. People are talking about his taxes. I wouldn't be surprised if he had problems with the IRS. It is basically the story with every great prize fighter who makes millions of dollars. Because you are not making a regular income, and especially if you're trying to project this lifestyle, Mayweather's lifestyle is obviously flamboyant. I mean, Conor McGregor's trying to portray it now by like renting cars and things, but to actually buy stuff like that is a tremendous waste of money. You know, you can't be whizzing away stuff on like, you can't be whizzing away millions in vanity purchases unless you actually have billions. You know, I don't know if you guys remember this, but last year, it might have been the year before actually, Louis Vuitton put out a line of boxing bag, like heavy bag and a speed bag and a double end bag and a gym bag and a load of other boxing stuff. And they only made one of each item. And the whole idea was that Mayweather and Justin Bieber are a market within themselves. They are both massive fans of boxing and massive fans of Louis Vuitton. So they just made these one-of-a-kind pieces, and it was going to basically be carved up between Mayweather and Bieber, with maybe a couple of weird oil billionaires in there just grabbing a piece of it. Look it up, actually. The stuff looked good, but it also looked like it could have been made for the price of any other heavy bag or whatever. Just had that attractive print on it. Actually, Mayweather, I love Mayweather. Mayweather, if you're listening, sponsor my podcast. No, don't, we're independent. But But do send me free stuff, because I love Mayweather's stuff, and they did a Louis Vuitton style print. I think it was a pair of shorts. Really cool stuff. Look up Mayweather if you grapple a lot or you train a lot. Get yourself some Mayweather stuff, or Scramble. Love them too. Anyone who does weird shit with prints, love it. But anyway, that was the banter that everyone was looking forward to. Wasn't great. I'm not gonna I'll be touching on the build up to this fight. I'm glad it's happening soon rather than getting like half a year of build up. Oh, the other thing was like Floyd Mayweather saying I'd be fine doing it in an octagon or fine doing it in 4-ounce gloves. Obviously, if they boxed in an octagon, not going to make much difference, except that there's no corners, which really... Mayweather makes a 20-foot ring look huge. If you put him in a 30-foot cage with very, very shallow corners, it's almost circular. No one's ever going to catch him. Obviously, the mats are made of different material, and you'd have to work out if shoes were allowed or what, and you can't lean back against the ropes in this. Well, you can. Ropes have a lot more give than a cage, but that whole thing is just silly. But the whole idea of him being like, "I'm open to 4-ounce gloves," no, you're not. Every possible detail of this fight would have been worked out and sorted before the contracts were signed. I mean, you could see that just from the amount of control that Mayweather and his people were holding over this press conference, and basically keeping it from becoming what people wanted it to be. I think McGregor came off well in the bits that I saw, but it's just so silly. Can't wait to get back to business as normal. Actually, one important thing that... I saw someone talking about this. I can't remember where it was. It was on a boxing forum or like a comment on a boxing article or something like that. But someone was saying that boxing has had a really good year, and objectively it has. Like, you had things like Klitschko versus Joshua, Ward versus Kovalev. There's been a few really good fights. Cotto versus Canelo, was that this year or last year? But there's been a few really good fights recently that have lived up to the hype. And the real problem with Floyd Mayweather is that he has a style that is not going to appeal to the casual fan. Except he has this gift for bringing in the casual fans to watch him lose, and then he fights this boring fight that, you know, the person who wants to see a fight is not going to appreciate, and then they're turned off boxing forever. So basically, like in the boxing world, there's this. I really hope Floyd doesn't turn even more fans off boxing than he did in the Pacquiao fight. I mean, we can all well, if you're listening to this podcast, you can probably appreciate Floyd Mayweather's skill and ability, but it is not the sort of thing that people who want to watch a fight want to see. He's just going to come back every 2 years and ruin boxing for everyone. Anyway, that's the news done. God, we took about 20 minutes with that. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to talk about that much, and then I rambled on about how silly it all is. I will be writing some kind of huge article about Mayweather McGregor, maybe even a series. I don't know. It'll be nearer the time, but you can't say no to all that traffic. I don't know how that'll work, because I don't know if we have any, I don't know if Mayweather's, what are they, Mayweather Productions? Whatever. I don't know how they feel about using GIFs. Typically boxing... unless it's classical boxing, I try not to use the GIFs, but I'll do something. People are like, do a Killing the King, Floyd Mayweather. I'll do something, but can't promise it'll be that. Anyway, let's talk about the fights this week, or last weekend, because they were fucking great. 2 main events, both absolutely brilliant. I loved them, and it might have been because my boys won, but I also thought one was just Fight of the Year material, the other was like Performance of the Year material. We'll talk about Gaethje versus Johnson first. I'm going to call this episode the Church of Gaethje because I've been preaching about this guy forever. And I think you'll see now why I said I want to see him in with the best guys in the world as soon as possible. He is improving stuff, and I was really impressed with some of the stuff he showed in this fight. But I want to see him while his body's holding up against the best guys in the world. I don't want to see him like after his chin started to give out, because he is a guy who gets hit. Like, that's his style. He's so aggressive, and he does wilt guys with that pressure. I mean, you saw they were both knackered within a round and a half. Despite him training for 5 rounds on the regular back in World Series of Fighting, that pace he puts on people, even if you're hitting a guy, but you're being rushed to do it, it's very tiring. Anyway, I wrote an article about this, and I called it "Better Opponent, Same Fight." And this is what I love about Gaethje. He promised to do this. He promised he'd fight the same. He said, "I'm not going to wrestle him. I might slam him on his head, but I'm not going to wrestle him. He said, I'm going to knock him down and I'm going to invite him to stand back up. He said, I'm going to keep walking forward. He said, I'll probably get hurt, but I'll just keep going. And all of that happened. Like, everything he said was true. Like, this is what I love about this guy. Firstly, he comes across as really quite thoughtful and sweet in a lot of his interviews. He wants to go on and he's got a social studies, social work degree or something like that, and he's always talked, like, since back in his early WSOF days, he's always talked about how he doesn't want to do this forever. He wants to go and help disadvantaged children. So you're like, fair enough. And he comes from this like mining town in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, so he's like, anything that's not working in the mines is great. Actually, I was reading this book, I think it's called, Black Diamonds. It's all about basically this coal empire in the UK, start of the 20th century. Shout out to that, go get it on Audible or whatever, a really good read. But he, it's that honesty that I really appreciate in this business of flim-flam and bullshit. He just says, this is what I'm going to do. I might well get knocked out in the process, but, I'm going to try. And he absolutely did it. And he does melt guys. Like, you do not see guys of Michael Johnson's level being finished like that, just the same way as Gaethje's finished everyone else. Typically, there are two ways to really improve your finishing rate against top-level fighters. The first is to be a really excellent counterpuncher, because anytime a guy, when you're inviting a guy to open up, he opens up opportunities for you to strike. The other way is to be an amazing pressure fighter, which works two ways. Firstly, the pressure is exhausting, but secondly, you are still inviting the guy to open up and try and keep him off him. You're setting a ticking clock on every exchange. That you're walking towards the fence and they're going, Jesus, how long do I have until he's going to put me on this fence or hit me next? I've got to do something. And they're lashing out wildly. So that pressure style is so effective. He is there. The whole thing about pressure is that you have to be present. You are a presence. You're using your presence to fight. That's your whole game. You can't be elusive and a pressure fighter. I mean, there are pressure fighters who are very slick with the head movement, but they are still there the entire time saying, here I am. And then, you can hit them in the body because it's very hard to move your body if you're still moving forward. But, it's just fascinating that, the opponent was so much better than all the other guys he's faced before, but it worked exactly the same way. Just walking him down, beating him up against the fence and chopping his legs out. Check out the article of this because the GIFs are really quite enlightening. I've watched this fight a few times now, and even though he got clipped with some hard shots, and he was the fight metric stats say that he got hit a lot. If you watch what he does, a lot of the connections are not. I wrote not all punches to the head are created equal, but the whole thing about covering up is that you get your chin down, you take the blows on the top of your head and on your forearms, which isn't conducive to long-term mental health, but you aren't, it's very unlikely that you're going to get knocked out unconscious with a blow to the top of the skull or the forehead. Those are basically the hardest, boniest bit of your head. There's nothing delicate like the jawline or the temples and orbital bones. Basically just a big bowling ball that they're trying to hit as hard as they can while it's moving forward. So if you watch this fight, I was also impressed with Gaethje moving his head. He was throwing a nice right straight into a crouch and then coming up with his low kicks after he'd slipped some punches. That's basically like the southpaw orthodox, the open stance equivalent of the jab and duck, which we talk about all the time with Roberto Duran and people like that. There's a great book, I can't remember what it's called, boxing book by the female Olympic coach for the US team, and she basically lists it as one of the key moves in all of boxing. She's like, jab and duck, all you need to know. But he was coming up and punting out the legs each time, and then Johnson would throw some straights against his guard, and he'd chop the legs again. Really entertaining style to watch. And then the few times he got rocked, actually, or hit hard, wasn't an issue with his defense, as he comes forward. It was an issue with him being out of position as he struck. The thing about naked low kicking, it's different in MMA than it is in Muay Thai, because Muay Thai, everyone's in their guard with the light lead leg, ready to kick, ready to snap it out and back, ready to get up and check whatever's coming back. In MMA, obviously, you're a bit heavier on your feet because you're going to wrestle, and especially if you're throwing very hard low kicks like Gaethje was, where you're digging in. If you're throwing those naked, you're giving the guy a lot of chances to step in on you, both as you kick, which is like the best sort of counter you can land, and as you recover your leg from the kick, which is, still a good time to catch you out of position. It's a position where you are going to struggle to move your head out of the way because you don't have both feet on the ground, and it's also a position where you're going to struggle to move out of the way because you don't have both feet on the ground. So there was the very first attack that Johnson hurt him with in the very first minute of the first round was as he was on one leg or coming down off one leg. The uppercut again was as he was out in the open off one leg, and that's the other thing. Being out in the open, covering up works really well if you're moving in, if you're pressuring, if you're moving your head, and you're making it hard for the guy to pick his shots. If you cover up and you're out in the open at distance, the other guy has time to look and say, okay, I'll slot the uppercut in through there, or I'll hit the body just there. Pressure combines with the covering up very well. The bad examples of covering up I always give are Stefan Struve and Martin Kampmann, because when they cover up, they go straight backwards onto the fence, and then they put their guard up, and then they cover up along the fence. And if you do that, you sat there with nowhere to go, and the other guy's going, okay, I'm just going to keep you at exactly arm's length until I work out what I want to hit, and then, dig in with my right hand or whatever. Watch Stefan Struve versus Junior Dos Santos for the epitome of that. But what we said last week was that I thought Johnson's left straight to the body would be a good look for this fight. We talked about the Nicky Holzken sparring session and how it worked against Nicky Holzken, who is a bit more of a technically sound guard up and walk forward fighter. And it absolutely worked. The body work came out as a major weakness for Gaethje. It really tired him quite quickly. But Gaethje he went to the body twice in a row at one point, and that was when Gaethje timed the right uppercut and stunned him. And the finish was just vintage Gaethje. He's so good when he gets his man to the fence and has his left hand on them, whether it's a collar tie or a stiff arm. He just starts winging those overhands and uppercuts and the short right elbow and the low kicks. And the low kick and the uppercut, the clinch low kick is a great look anyway, because especially if you're pushing or pulling the guy around, he can't pick his leg up because you're moving his weight onto it. But, watch that Palomino clip where he just decks him with low kicks. Absolutely gorgeous. But the other thing is that guys will start bending down when they're worried about getting kicked in the leg and they can't pick their leg up. And you can start hammering in the uppercut. The uppercuts he lands along the fence, just they're bus driver uppercuts, snapping this guy's head back. The short elbow he put him down was gorgeous. Johnson shoots a couple of takedowns and he sprawls on them effortlessly and does the get back up look. And then the flying knee for the finish, the flying knee into a flurry along the fence. But the best thing is that I searched, because I knew I'd seen him hit it in other fights, so I quickly searched Justin Gaethje flying knee while I was putting this article together, hoping to get someone had already made a GIF of it. Top thing on Google was the YouTube clip of Trevor Whitman demonstrating this exact flying knee with Justin Gaethje in 2014, and some dick is in the comments going that won't work. I'm a professional Muay Thai fighter, blah 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 blah, and actual Justin Gaethje is getting into an argument with him in the comments about how it would work. Just hilarious, because he's landed that knee in a few fights now. But this, if you didn't know who Justin Gaethje was before this, and I've been talking about him for a while, this is one of the most... it's up there with Anderson Silva versus Chris Lieben as most impressive UFC debut. But also, I think this will win him a lot of fans, this fight. It's a shame that they're talking about putting him in with a fight with Eddie Alvarez now, because he's just beaten the number 5 ranked lightweight, and that's a step down now. In terms of ranking, obviously Eddie Alvarez is a great fighter. But, it would have been great if he'd just been come in, beaten Johnson, if he got put into the fight with Tony Ferguson and won that, and suddenly he, guy no one had heard of 6 months ago was the guy that McGregor was going to fight next. That'd just be hilarious. And it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. But he got 100k and show money, 100k win money, and a bonus on top of that. So I'm really happy for that dude. He's not the style of fighter that typically I gravitate to as someone who is really keen on the the manly art of defense, staying safe. But he's such an exciting fighter. I've just rambled on for about 10 minutes about how much I love this guy's fighting style. And I'm sure that's what a lot of you guys did to your friends after this. I was immediately texting people, go and watch this fight. And they were going, what? No, the big fight's tomorrow. And I was like, no, watch this fight now. Yeah, what a great fight. And he advances to 18-0. And this is what I said after the fight. I was like, immediately after this fight, the comments on the highlight on Reddit were like, that won't work against top level fighters. And you're like, well, it just did. The thought that I ended my article on was, it'll work until it doesn't. It's like the Diaz's. You can punch them in the head all day, but no one has succeeded in knocking them out yet. So you need to start planning something different. Anything else interesting happened on this card? Not tremendously, to be honest. Let's move on to the UFC 213 card. Breaking news came in while I was recording this. Sorry. MVP Michael Venom Page has signed with David Hayes Boxing Promotion. Top comment on this article I'm reading is, cool, now he can go fight cans in a different sport. Oh god, that's glorious. Yeah, that guy cannot decide what he's going to do, and he's wasted 5 years fighting no one of note. But I said that last week. Let's move on. Right, let's talk about the main event, because it was the real deal. Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero. Robert Whittaker, been one of my boys for a while, but, well, now he's got a belt, can't be my boy. But, I think with Max Holloway we said interim belt doesn't count. But he is turning into one of the best rounded fighters in the game today, which I suppose means ever. You're just not going to see a guy as technically gifted. Well, I would put him in my top 10 pound for pound. In ability alone, that is, maybe not accomplishment. But then Romero and Jacare back to back is incredible. And the best part of those two fights is those two guys were athletic freaks, who had their amazing ability in grappling, but could get by in striking with guys who should know better just on their own natural ability and attributes. Whittaker took them both apart with striking science. He's got good attributes of his own. Don't get me wrong there, but I don't think he's going to be looking in the shape that Romero and Jacare are at 40. What you got from him was the science. Now, against Jacare, you remember I was talking about how he double jabbed and feinted into his jab and used a lot of feints, and really, it's the same thing that I thought would make Michael Bisping a difficult matchup for Anderson Silva, even in his prime. It's that not relying on one punch or a big punch. It's that putting in stuff to scramble the signal, tapping connections, studding connections. If you just keep touching the guy, firstly, you're appealing to his inner perfectionist. Guys don't like getting hit, even if it was just with annoying slappy blows. Secondly, you're hiding the big shots in with dozens of little shots, which is what Bisping did against Silva and basically through his entire career. But Whittaker is a guy who has that left hook that can starch people. He is a left hook Larry of sorts, but he also hides his blows well, uses lots of different blows, mixes it all up. I didn't know he was a karateka. Now that I know that, on Tough he was basically like the karate guy apparently, but now that I know that, I see it all the time. He does that bouncing, short stance bouncing. As soon as he's going to move, he kicks out into that long sprinter's stance and leaps in with his strike. Just real, I'm not going to say basic because it's not basic, but actually no, not going to say simple because it's not simple, but basic tournament karate stuff. Bouncy, 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 into the stance, burst forward. But yes, I expected him to use his jab a lot more in this fight, but right from the get-go, as soon as he steps in to punch, Romero slams in that low-line sidekick. And, we're talking about, whenever we talk about this, it's controversial because people don't like it. They're worried about guys getting their knees turned inside out, snapping bone through skin, the action movie look. But I think we can say now that these kicks are pretty dangerous. I mean, Rampage got his knees fucked up by Jones. Keith Jardine had that really nasty one against Brandon Vera. Mark Jacasey, his last opponent, actually blew out his MCL when Jacasey kicked him in the knee. This one, Whittaker apparently had a pre-existing injury, but you can see the effect that getting stomped on the knee has on guys. What's his name? Adlan Amagov? Aslan, the star of C.S. Lewis's Lion, the Witch in the Wardrobe, he kicked a guy in Strikeforce. Pat Miletich was on commentary being like, I'm pretty sure that's illegal. It should be illegal. But that was another really bad one too. Like, there is real potential for guys to get hurt with that very badly. It is legal, so you've got to learn to deal with it, and I would like to see more guys retracting the leg or picking. If you're going to check it, you've got to pick the leg up and keep it well bent so that you take the kick like low on the shin. Or you can parry it, which is what Gustafsson did to Jones. And if you remember TJ Dillashaw versus Rafaela Sunsao 2, which I never actually got to write about, but I wanted to. One of the nice looks he did in that was he parried into the back of the calf with his lead forearm and came down, basically putting himself on the dominant angle like Southpaw Orthodox, and came down the middle with the right hand. It was really nice. Or left hand, can't remember. TJ switches, whichever one's correct there. But right from the get-go, that really upset Whittaker, stopped him stepping in with his jab so much, because he steps in with a nice double jab, catches Romero off guard in the first few seconds, and that's the sort of thing I thought we were going to be seeing all fight. But then the next time he gets his knee stomped on, and it's like, oh, that just disappears. And what you see from then on is constant right front kicks, which is something that if you said one strike you're going to throw at the best wrestler in the division, front kick probably wouldn't be on the list. But if you're really confident in your takedown defense, and also he was throwing it quite high a lot of the time too, right in the chest, so it's a little bit more difficult to knock off line or pick up. But there are a lot of advantages to it, as well as it being a dangerous one against a wrestler. One of the advantages was every time he hit with it, he could push Yoel Romero away from him, which is really nice if you're just trying to pick points and prevent yourself getting into long exchanges. But he could also dig it in like a front snap kick and come in behind it with blows. If you've seen the Tavares knockout, he'll throw that kick and then he'll put it down like either square or behind him and leap forward with the left hook. But he'll also throw that kick and put it down in front of him and then throw the left overhand. He was showing lots of nice little things off that. One of the things that really stood out was the takedown defense, and I went back and watched the Jacare fight because it's become like a common pattern now. That building up along the fence. And fence wrestling is something that guys are doing every day in every gym, but Whittaker's team have really got it down. He comes up with normally his left side on the fence, with the back body lock. He'll come up with his left side on the fence and his right foot up, so that the left, if the opponent wanted to put in the hooks from the back and take back control, the left hook is blocked by the fence itself, the right hook is blocked by the right knee. It's sort of like the running man escape that Saulo Ribeiro teaches, which is where you're in like the bottom of the side control. You roll to one side like you're heading towards the turtle. By having one knee up, you're blocking that hook coming in, and obviously the other one's blocked by the ground. Similar principle. But then what he does is he controls the wrists and starts sliding his right arm back so that the elbow goes through between his body and Romero's arms. And then once that's in, he'll start standing up and turning to face, and that arm becomes an underhook. Really slick stuff, and he went to it over and over again. It happened about 6 times in this fight. There was one long period where he was in that position on one knee along the fence for a long time, and you saw Romero going to everything he could think of. He was like trying to put the hook in, couldn't get the hook in. As soon as he did get the hook in, Whittaker would take it out. This is how Whittaker scraped Jacare off his back in that fight. And so Romero just goes to like kneeing him in the arse, which if the guy just sits there, great. But he's not just sitting there, he's building up. Like he's in a position between two positions where he's about to escape. So you're really stuck for what you can do against him, like knee him in the thigh. Also that knee, the right knee being up shields the body from being kneed as it would if you were down in the turtle or in like wrestler's base. So really interesting position. Obviously wrestling is not my strong suit, but I just saw this and thought, wow, that's really cool. He's getting to be one of the best anti-wrestlers in MMA. He's like up there with Aldo. Obviously very different techniques for both of them. Aldo feeds the single, limp legs out, or hops to the fence and starts trying to hit switches and things like old BJ Penn. But yeah, just fascinating. If you are a guy coming from a striking background and you want to learn how to deal with guys who have a massive wrestling advantage on you, Whittaker is one of the guys to watch, because, doesn't matter how much wrestling Romero did, he had like a 20-year international career. He wasn't dealing with fences in that time. That fence is so useful because it holds you up, stops the guy sneaking around one side of you, completely shuts down one side of you, and then you can bring up the knee on the other side, and there's everything gone on that side too. Fascinating performance in that regard. And then the important point was, as we talked about last week, Romero, a lot of people were like, it's a lie that he doesn't have that he has a poor gas tank or anything like that. I wouldn't say his gas tank's poor, but he explodes a lot, and he isn't relying so much on technique as he is on speed a lot of the time, especially striking, not so much wrestling. He's very technically good wrestling, but a lot of the time he's relying on his speed, cat-like reflexes and agility, and that stuff really takes it out of you, even if you are a well-conditioned athlete. Which is why long periods of Romero's fights are very boring, like a lull, and then suddenly there's a burst of action. I've said this before about other guys, when people are like, they don't get tired, everyone gets tired. It's about making them work. Guys, I mean, I think of Kenny Florian versus BJ Penn, you know, wrestle him to the fence and then hold him there. He's not going to get tired if you're not making him do stuff, because if he realizes that you're just planning to hold him there, he might just chill for a while, you know. But Whittaker did a great job of making Romero work constantly. You know, he was up in his face, and then if Romero seemed like he was doing something, he'd draw him out and come back at him and make sure that he was always thinking about what was happening, as opposed to taking those long periods where he's just sort of dancing around the octagon. One other thing I really liked was when he got taken down into guard. That's where Romero knocked out Lyoto. Hit the ground, posture up as fast as possible, and start dropping elbows on him, you know. Especially in like the third round of a fight, guys don't expect you to just explode up and start pounding as quickly as that. Whittaker did a great job of getting underhooks and grapevines and just pulling Romero's base out and hugging him as tight as possible. There was nothing Romero could do from there. And then he started working in the butterfly hooks, sweeping up to his feet, tried to sweep Romero. Obviously very hard to sweep a guy with balance that good, so he goes to his knees, gets up and runs to the fence and starts building up in that same position once again. And you just see it all flow together beautifully. So in terms of Whittaker's striking, you didn't get to see him open up as much as you'd want to in this performance, but I think he definitely decisively took the last 3 rounds. And his counter wrestling, wrestling technically, but counter wrestling was absolutely brilliant. In fact, that links in with the book that I'm going to talk, well, one of the 2 books I'm going to talk about later. Won't spoil it now, but just excellent performance. Whittaker is becoming one of the best fighters I've ever seen in terms of technical ability and discipline. I mean, discipline is so important to a fight. This is what made Manny Pacquiao special in his prime, what made Floyd Mayweather special. It's very hard through a fight to remember to mind your P's and Q's all the time. You know, guys can learn how to do stuff in the gym and be in great shape, but suddenly in the 3rd, 4th round, they'll just start losing track of what they're doing. They'll start going, okay, maybe I'll try this weird knee or something like that. But Whittaker is always on point and is looking for new stuff, but remembering the keys to his game plan. I did like the mist. We talked about Romero's head movement, you know, he's slipping really low and ducking and stuff last week. Whittaker looked for the head kick as Romero ducked, and Romero actually ducked under it. And Rogan did this like girlish squeal, like "woo" on commentary. It was brilliant. That's why we love Rogan, because he is a real fan and gets into it like that. But immediately after that, Whittaker pretends to throw the high kick again and knees with Romero in the face as he's ducking. Fortunately, he didn't duck quite as passionately as he did the first time, but really nice little look. And there was a left uppercut he landed as a counter, like Alexis Arguello style, along the fence, really nice. I wrote an article about Alexis Arguello where we talk about that uppercut. You should look that up, it's on Fightland somewhere. Lead uppercut counter, very rare punch, but because it's so rare, it's a really powerful counter. Guys do not see it coming. Good God, we're an hour in, or almost an hour in, and I've talked about 2 fights. Let's get on to some of the other stuff that happened. I really liked Rob Font's performance against Douglas Silva de Andrade. There seemed like there were 2 Silvers in his introduction, but Douglas Andrade, we'll call him now. Font looked really good in that. There was a really nice moment where Andrade threw this big winging uppercut, and immediately after it had gone through, Font ducked for his hips. Really nice counter to train, because you're not going to see the uppercut and go, now I'm safe. But if you understand how the uppercut works and how rare it is for a guy to throw a right uppercut and then a left uppercut after it, or a right uppercut and then a knee, it's very rare for guys to throw 2 strikes from underneath in a row, because the uppercut serves the purpose of coming from underneath, and then if you don't catch the guy, it's because he's already standing upright. So guys train for the uppercut left hook or uppercut left hook to the liver. The uppercut is really used to do something. Or if they just throw the right uppercut on its own, it's just on its own. So after that right uppercut's come through, it's a really good time to go for the hips. Really appreciated that. It was lovely. And then Andrade got up along the fence and tried for the Gary Tonin, like Kani Basami scissor leg takedown, but you go onto one leg so that you get the inside Sankaku position, that triangle around the leg, and you can look for the heel hook. I think Stan said it won't work against that caliber of competition, but if you're Gary Tonin and it's basically half your game, then it does. I mean, Gary Tonin's got this great game from butterfly guard where he'll have the guy in front of him reach over his back, grab his lat, stand up, and present him that lead leg. And from that, he'll go for guillotines, he'll go for Kimuras, the Kimura trap thing. He'll go, but he does a lot of like leaping in sideways and getting that leg. He showed tons of it against Huzamar Palhares, didn't quite catch him, but he went to it several times against Gilbert Burns, Durinho, and eventually heel hooked him, I believe. Both those fights worth watching just for that. Gamble Dub did a shortened down version of the Durinho fight. Durinho. Did a shortened down version of that fight, and it's on YouTube. You can watch that particular stand-up that Gary Tonin does. Really nice. And then watch Andrade do it and fail. But yeah, I thought Font was really good in that fight. His striking was really slick. Got the guillotine choke in the second round. And that was bantam. Oh, I thought they were flyweights. I was about to say how excited I was that the flyweights were on the main card and did a really good performance. And then the other one that really I enjoyed was Pettis versus Miller, for obvious reasons. I did a commentary for that, but I didn't upload it in the end because I was having all sorts of technical issues. And I don't really like to upload just like one commentary. I like to upload like a few, so that I can put a playlist together and folks can actually get some fun out of watching through the whole event or whatever. But basically, Pettis' plan in the first two rounds seemed to be backing Miller up towards the fence and then body kicking him as hard as possible when he didn't have anywhere to retreat. Miller did a lot of running on a straight line, and Pettis would move offline and he'd run past. Groundwork was really fun. And again, Pettis gives up his back and against a really good black belt and it just turns in and deals with it. I've never seen a guy that good at escaping from back control and coming up on top like that. You'll see lots of guys who are good at escaping back control and like reclaiming half guard or something like that. But it's almost like a sweep at this point with Pettis. He was giving up his back constantly to Oliveira and just spinning around and ending up in closed guard. Henry Akins did an interesting article about the back as two different positions. If you're on top of someone behind them, that's like being mounted, so it's even better. But if you're underneath someone when you're on their back, you're just a little away from guard. And they can put their weight on you that's one of the like really basic level escapes, to just push your hips up bridge style so that you're on them. More often now you'll see guys sliding down and looking for what Salo calls the scoop. Been talking for an hour, so I'm losing my voice now, sorry about that. Yeah, great fight. Overeem versus Verdum, no more need to be said. What else do I have? Oh, I'd really like Chad Laprise versus Brian Camozzi. Brian Camozzi looks a lot like Chris Camozzi. I was very confused. But Laprise did a great job of that. That right hand to the body is one of the few techniques that being the shorter man is real advantage on. Your reach is longest at the shoulder. If you are shorter, you have a speed advantage on the level change, and you can get your level low enough to so that your shoulder is level with the opponent's solar plexus very quickly. So that right straight to the body can be a real killer. Don't see it enough. Great use of it by Chad Laprise. Right, we'll do book of the week, then we'll do a quick plug, then I'll have a break to refresh my tea, then we'll do some questions, some previews, and then we'll sign off. It's looking like this is going to be the longest Fights Gone By ever. Apologies. Or you're welcome, depending. Let's do our books of the week. The first one is Jack Dempsey's Championship Fighting, which I bought in paper for the first time to do the Jack Dempsey episode of the Patreon lectures. But I used it to look at stuff I was already talking about that I knew was in the book, as opposed to reading it from cover to cover, which I hadn't done in years. So I'm going through it cover to cover now, and I'm really enjoying it. There's talk of him having a ghostwriter do it, or him explain it to a writer, which wouldn't surprise me at all. If you read something written by a sports star, almost always they've had someone else word it for them. A lot of the time it'll be sitting down for interviews or an interview or a series of interviews, and the writer going, "Okay, now I'll construct this into a readable form." But there's a lot of important stuff in there, you know, the drop step, the hip whirl, and interestingly, I thought some of the defensive stuff, which I'd overlooked because I only remember the stuff about how to hit hard, because that's what you go to a book on Dempsey for, or book by Dempsey for. The defensive stuff's quite interesting, actually. Bits on sidestepping, stopping uppercuts, because uppercuts were a problem for him, as you saw in the fight versus Jack Sharkey. Talk on the clinch and the sneaker. The sneaker is something that's stayed in my parlance, you know, that terminology I've always used, but especially in MMA, you're seeing more and more guys get knocked down or out as they come out of the clinch because they're wrestling, and you know, breaking off along the fence. Stipe Miocic versus Junior Dos Santos, great example. Yeah, the sneaker is one of the best punches in the game. So that's well worth a read. If you don't have it, I think it's only a few quid on Amazon if you get it used. The reprint of it is really nice. And my other book for the week, which will probably be a bit harder to find, but I dug it out just on a whim, just sitting in front of the shelves looking through, going, oh, haven't read that actually all the way through ever. It's by Ray F. Carson, who wrote Championship Wrestling, which I rate as one of the better wrestling texts out there. I think I call it the Edwin Hazlitt's boxing of wrestling. But he wrote a few books, and this one is called Counter Control for Championship Wrestling. And the theory through the whole book is that wrestling is a series of attacks and counters, or counters to counters. And this was this book preaches a style of wrestling that is aggressively defensive, he says. And it just goes through dozens and dozens of ways to make it very hard to take you down or pin you. So I suppose, I'm looking through it and looking at the techniques, and I'm thinking, okay, a few of these I haven't seen before, to be honest. And it's a really good book if your main concern for your wrestling is being not taken down. Full of interesting takedown defense options. Carson's books are always quite interesting. The Championship Wrestling is just a collection of articles that he'd written that he put into a book, which really is sort of like the best of Carson. And he had a lot of interesting theories. Nowadays the stand-up is the most common answer to the referee's position anyway. But when Carson was around, it wasn't always the case. So what he did was he performed a study. I think it was 2 years he did of basically escape attempts from the bottom of referee's position, and how often they succeeded and how often they not failed, but how often they were scored on off the failed attempt. And he found that if you tried to stand first and then attempt the switch or the Granby or whatever, not only was your percentage of success higher because the stand-up itself was opening them up to that, your chances of being scored on were much lower because you're taking your scapula as far away from the floor as possible. So a really scientific guy, really interested in the numbers and working out why those numbers happen that way. Just really interesting. Any of his books are great if you can find them on Amazon used or eBay. But Counter Control for Championship Wrestling is just a very unique book. Right, before I go and refresh my tea, just a quick plug for the Patreon. I mentioned just then the Jack Dempsey lecture on Patreon. I can't remember how many we've done now, either 7 or 8, I think. But they're between an hour and an hour and a half so far. Actually, no, the most recent one is probably nearer 2 hours. But lengthy lectures on history and on either people or time periods. We've done mainly boxing ones up till now. Then we did the Kazushi Sakuraba and the Pride 2000 Grand Prix. So many people signed up for that. Been hearing some really positive stuff about it. There's a great back catalogue of stuff to listen to. And if you sign up, obviously it helps me do this show. Allows me to sit down on a Wednesday and steal 2 hours when I should probably be doing my actual job, just to chat to you about fights. So if you want to go support the show, or if you just want to hear those episodes, go sign up. It really helps us. And cheers for your support. The other piece of plug is, if you haven't read Notorious, the Life and Fights of Conor McGregor, I'm really proud of it. You can get it on Amazon for a really good price right now. If you live in America, just do that and pay like £2 for postage, like I used to do for all the martial arts texts that only came out in America. But I know there's a lot of people put off by the fact that it's Conor McGregor. I'll be honest, the book's not a love letter to Conor McGregor by any means. There's a lot of stuff about how he's changed the dynamic in mixed martial arts. Everyone's asking for money fights now, how that's not always a great thing, how it happened in boxing, and 100 years ago guys were complaining about Dempsey having the same thing. Talk a lot about different techniques, why Brimage was open for the uppercut, what the dangers of the uppercut are, the front kicks and the infighting on the fence, the whole pair of Diaz rivalries, the two Diaz fights, that whole rivalry, probably the best stuff I've ever written. I'm really proud of that. Yeah, every opponent covered in detail, every fight covered in detail, every strategy covered in detail, and right up to this Mayweather fight where I'm like, oh, can't see it happening, and then it does. But definitely worth your time and worth a read. Right, I'm off to get some more tea. Cheers. Right, let's do some questions. Hey, Jackamus Slackamus Maximus, big fan of the show. People remember some fighters for bringing in style/techniques/entire game plans that became extremely popular amongst other athletes, such as hailing Mark Coleman as the pioneer of ground and pound for MMA, and Marcelo Garcia for bringing popularity to the seatbelt grip and the high elbow guillotine. My question is, what other fighters in any combat sport have brought in an element that has since become a staple of the sport? Alternatively, what style/element became intensely popular for a while but then faded out with the meta? And that's from either Tomas or Thomas. I think it's very difficult because, as the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun. And, you're talking about... when we talk about, pioneering, a lot of people get confused with inventing. There's a lot of things in MMA that... or any combat sport that you can go, well, so-and-so was doing that X hundred years ago. Really, when we're thinking of a pioneer, we're talking about someone who really popularized the technique. So actually, a lot of Marcelo's innovations have been things that he came up with or, really did pioneer in terms of they just weren't part of the BJJ thinking when he came along, until he came along, rather. But, equally, he didn't invent all the stuff he did. The over-under grip did exist before that. He was just the one who said, no, this is the better way of doing things. This is how I'm going to do it every time now, and had all that success. If you aren't familiar with this, listeners, the over-under or the seatbelt is when you're on the back, you have one arm over the shoulder and one arm under the armpit on the other side, and then they're clasped together. And it makes it a lot easier to go for chokes straight away. In the real old days, the Gracies used to go for double unders from the back, like the body lock, and then put their hooks in. And that is what Sakuraba basically thrived on. Guys would grab the body lock and try and put the hooks in, but he'd just take the Kimura off and get his legs away and turn and face them. I think Dominic Cruz will be remembered very favourably for his footwork and evasiveness in MMA, but Anderson Silva will be remembered for the front kick and all this and the back elbow and the stuff that was really momentary. That was just stuff that happened to score some knockouts for him. But really, Anderson Silva was one of the first MMA fighters to, as a striker, say, no, I'm going to keep the distance and make guys come to me. Before that, you see guys like Krokop and Vanderlei, and, well, Chuck Liddell to an extent, but, you'd go forward, you'd swing, and then you'd sprawl on the guy. So you were almost fighting double hard, You had to be ready to drop your hips on the guy at any moment. Where Anderson Silva really created that buffer zone between him and the opponent, danced around the ring a lot, cage, and said, you come to me. And then if the guys weren't very convincing in a lot of these very strong wrestlers, not very convincing in their striking. So it was quite easy for him to tell the difference between if they were going to come in with strikes or come in with a shot. If you shoot from too far away, it doesn't matter who it is, they're going to be able to sprawl on it in time. Within reason. If it's a decent athlete of your weight who's been training sprawl, not sprawling, 6 months sprawl training, lol. If it's a decent athlete of your weight who's been training wrestling for a long time, if you take bad shots at him, he should be able to sprawl on you. So rather than like the Chael Sonnen thing of get in his face, throw punches and duck in on the shots, most guys were drawn into this like timidity, and then they'd either shoot from too far out or run in with punches in just a really clumsy way that made them easy to counter. And then you saw guys like Lyoto Machida, and to be fair, like now the new age, if you think of someone as mainly a striker, a lot of their takedown defense is going to be not giving the opportunity to go after the legs. But really, Anderson Silva was one of the very first guys to have that level of success built on that strategy. And I think that's one of the reasons why he was so middle of the pack in Pride and so excellent in the UFC. You know, once you take away the sharp corners of the ring that you can get trapped in, and you have the fence to hold you up and let you pummel for the double collar tie if you're Anderson Silva. But you have all that space to circle around in and very shallow corners to get trapped in. Once you open that up, that style becomes a lot more reasonable. Whereas Vanderlei, Krokop, etc., they would walk forward, trap guys in corners, swing, and then try and smack their hips down on top of the guy's head. So that's one of the real meta changes that you can see in mixed martial arts. There are others, but I think to today's what is going on today, you know, we got a lot more rounded fighters than Anderson Silva now, but I think that has made the biggest difference to what you see today and why striking has become so much more important than it was before Silva. Distance is everything, and now that guys are realizing that it's not striking and wrestling, it's just distance. You're seeing the game really blossom into this beautiful hybrid mix that it always was working towards becoming. There you go. People say I don't praise Anderson Silva enough, but the guy really did change the game. IMHO. On the subject of this guy's intro, by the way, Jackimus Slackimus Maximus, I was watching Monty Python's Life of Brian for the first time in years the other night with the in-laws. And I was in fits at the biggest dickus scene. If you've never seen it, go watch the whole film. But that scene is just, if you've ever been everyone's been in a situation where you aren't supposed to laugh and you're going to get bollocked if you do. And it's just unbearable. That scene really sums it up. And for some reason, I was giggling like a schoolgirl the entire time. Anyway, so thanks for the question, Thomas or Thomas. Hi Jack, let's talk pressure, and specifically how to apply in MMA without walking into strikes, and what openings should you be looking for as you cook people. I really like the scientific pressure of RDA, but I'm struggling to replicate it in sparring. Is pressure reserved for the larger man, and does it rely on the open stance matchup? Thanks, Josh. No, definitely doesn't rely on the open stance matchup. In fact, a lot of there's not too many like really amazing pressure fighting southpaws against orthodox fighters. MMA we're seeing it a lot more because there's a lot more southpaws in MMA because guys come in from wrestling backgrounds or BJJ backgrounds where they're used to passing with the right foot forward and they're just more comfortable standing that way. But a lot of boxing, the best punch for an infighter is that short digging left uppercut to the solar plexus. That was Henry Armstrong's favourite. And that really only happens when you've got that lead shoulder to lead shoulder, that closed guard situation where your lead shoulders slot inside of each other. Not being a very experienced pressure fighter myself, I can't give you I never like to give people like what I do to train for stuff anyway, because the things I'm good at are very small and a weird bunch of things. I just like little tricks and stuff. But I can give you some examples of guys who are very good at that sort of stuff. If you're thinking about like elusive forward movement, and actually this links in well with what we were talking about Gaethje. If you move forward, you are using your presence. There is that danger that you're going to get hit. And I say danger, you are going to get hit, but you want to try and avoid as much as possible. And if you start thinking of it from an aggressive standpoint, think Tyson, Julio Cesar Chavez, guys who landed their best punches as their opponents opened up while they were moving towards them. With Tyson, it was the slip left hook, or he did really well with that dipping jab to the body. watch any Customato footage where he's talking about boxing. He shows that dipping jab. It's a really slick little technique. Bit more dangerous with knees involved, but not a lot of guys who can pick up their lead knee powerfully and quickly like that. Like I said, that one guy got knocked out body jabbing Aldo from miles away years ago, and we were all like, "Oh, body jab's too dangerous for MMA." Max Holloway just came up and body jabbed Aldo easily. If you're doing it with tons of other stuff and you're actually getting into the appropriate range first, you should be okay. It's a fairly non-committal technique if you're not like lunging in with it like a rapier from miles out. But Tyson versus Berbick is a great example. His best punches come as he's moving in and Berbick opens up towards him. Tyson really wasn't a great infighter in the sense of like getting in the kitchen and banging. He could get tied up quite easily, like Larry Holmes at the age of 80 tied up Tyson along the ropes for 4 rounds. What he did best was panic people into reaching for him as he moved in with that, that constantly bobbling head movement. A very scary sight coming towards you. But as guys lashed out at him, he'd fire over the top with the right hand or come up with the left hook afterwards. And those were his big punches. They were really more counters on offense. And that's what we talk about when we talk about offensive counter strikers. It's probably the most labor-intensive style, and you have to have very quick reactions, and you are going to get hit, but it produces a lot of knockouts. Julio Cesar Chavez, his favourite thing was throwing that long overhand while he dipped his head off to the side, and it would be a cross-counter if the opponent jabbed, and then he'd get inside and start banging the body in the head. That's a really nice way to bridge the gap, like that, just overhand cross-counter. But those two guys, great to watch for closing the distance. And regarding the smaller man thing, no. Sorry. Henry Armstrong, he went from, featherweight to, he was the featherweight champion of the world, won the welterweight championship of the world, went back and won the lightweight championship of the world, then fought for the middleweight championship of the world and lost a controversial decision. So he could have won 4 of the 8 boxing titles available at that time. And he was a pressure fighter. He got in the kitchen. He barely ever looked at his opponent. He just put his head against theirs, lead shoulder inside of theirs, lead shoulder on their chest, and then he'd start digging this short left uppercut to the solar plexus. And then if he could, he'd shoulder bump him with the left shoulder, illegal technically, and then try and swing the right hand over the top of them. I think he called it his blackout punch. Basically what you see from the clinch nowadays with guys lifting the opponent up with their underhooking arm and trying to punch him over the top with the right hand. But yeah, watch any Armstrong match. If you watch him against Barney Ross was a brilliant counterpuncher. Heavily involved with the Jewish mob, I believe, Arnold Rothstein and all those guys. If you find his book, send it to me because it's very rare. But his fight with Armstrong is one of the ones that we got on film, and Armstrong is just constant. He's a pressure cooker. Head down, looking at the guy's feet. Bit of a dirty fighter, elbowed a lot, but then if we're talking MMA, you're allowed to elbow. Butted a lot. Not so much allowed. Actually, I forgot to mention Gaethje. His first successful flurry came because as Johnson stepped in, he ducked his head down, and Johnson ran face first onto the top of it, the old nodder. We can say accidental, but then later in the fight, Gaethje does the same thing, and then Johnson goes to shoot, and Gaethje head blocks him, puts his head down in the way of him, as you would in freestyle wrestling. So he knows that his head can be put in the way of things to stop the opponent. Anyway, hope that helps. Cheers, Josh. Hi, Jack. I'd like to throw a suggestion in the hat. A history episode talking about the evolution of MMA meta from style versus style era to this what is grappling thing, to the emergence of the wrestler, to sprawl and brawl, to spinning shit, to where we are today. Don't really have any more specific suggestions for this topic, as the thought just popped into my head in the shower. Best, Chad. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, always looking for new ideas for these history episodes. I am at the moment researching several ideas for the next one. Won't spoil too much, but one of them's Bas Rutten, which sort of fits in with this whole theme. I mean, this is an overarching theme, how the game changes. We've been doing that with the boxing series. We approached the Pride 2000 Grand Prix, which was, as we were dispelling this era of the Gracies, the Pride 2000 Grand Prix happened 3 weeks before Hickson's last match. Hickson wasn't ever going to fight any of the guys in the Grand Prix. They were far beyond what he was used to. And then we were talking about like the Coleman's success as the wrestler. Vovchanchin was rising at that time, and he was one of the very first knockout artists in MMA. There's been very few who can starch guys like Igor, and back in those days it was even rarer. So yeah, these are all, that's more the constant theme of the series. We're going over just how things change over the years. But yeah, that was one of the reasons I started it, Chad. I really like the idea of how fighting has changed and which bits come back into fashion. A lot of this stuff just goes out of vogue, comes back in, because as soon as guys stop training for it, then it becomes legitimate again. If you follow Tournament BJJ, barely any Berimbolos this year at was it the Worlds? Whatever was the last big tournament. Because guys have been working so hard on taking that away. But it does open up like more traditional options. Adam, what's his name? The guy that BJJ Scout just studied. He's bringing back the butterfly guard, which, if you're Marcelo Garcia, it's always been around. But this lad's sweeping guys with the belt grip, like old school Leo Santos style. Really cool. Hi Jack, you complete and utter boy. Can you speak on when it is appropriate to stand light on the lead leg in a more traditional defensive tie stance, which allows for more lead leg attacks, e.g. push kicks and round kicks in MMA, when the takedown comes into play? Thanks, my dude, I love you. From Jack. I promise that is not me, I did not write that one myself. Lightly leg stance, yeah, you'll see it occasionally. The problem with the lead leg stance, or the light lead leg stance, is that, as you said, it's something that you use to open up lead leg kicking more, but generally lead leg kicking is a bit more dangerous in MMA. I mean, it depends. If you're standing side on and you're using like side kicks or something like that, that's not as dangerous as if you were kicking with the back leg from that stance. It's all like relative depending on how you're standing and stuff. But if you're talking like round kicks left and right from like a fairly normal stance, the right kick is going to be longer, because you've got to remember where the pivoting leg is what dictates the length of the technique. If your pivoting leg is nearer, once you turn your hips into the kick and you're basically side on and finish the kick, whichever one the pivoting leg was nearer on is longer. Bas Rutten does a bit about this, but unless you bring your right foot right level to where your left foot was and you really push forward with your hips, very hard to get the same length. So you're throwing a shorter kick, and it often doesn't have as much power, which is why it can be quite difficult in MMA. That being said, what I do like is guys who step up into the kick from a fairly normal stance, guys like Semi Schilt, Glauco Toza. Obviously helps if you're very tall and long like those guys and you have a wicked Brazilian kick with your lead leg, but they both had tremendous success by standing in a more normal stance and stepping into their kicks. Because also that step, as soon as the other guy starts reacting to that step, you can use it to set up other stuff. If he starts retreating from that step, you can start marching him onto the ropes or the fence just by bringing that back leg up and then stepping forward again. However, I would say that Robert Whittaker, my boy, if you watch his fight with Jacare, he's against the fence. He'll pick up his lead leg and slam it into Jacare's solar plexus. Beautiful use of the teep or the snap kick or whatever you want to term it, because it was like a middle point, but winded Jacare and pushed him away. If you watch Benson Henderson versus Brandon Thatch, he does exactly the same thing against a much bigger opponent. I think once you're getting towards the fence, maybe the light leg is a lot more reasonable, because your stance is going to be shortening anyway, and a lot of guys just shorten it and don't really do anything about it. But if your stance is being shortened by the opponent's pressure anyway, you might as well start looking for counters with that lead leg. I really like the quick left round kick underneath the opponent's right straight. If you draw the right straight along the fence, which is fairly easy to do, you could land the left leg under there. Lawrence Larkin is an interesting guy because he's got a great left kick and he does like to draw the right hands on the fence and pivot out behind his lead shoulder, but I've not seen him fire them out underneath the punch too often. I think that'd be a great addition to his game, actually. Yeah, I mean, it's something you've got to play with. I think there are times when you can use everything, but I think generally in MMA where you're not needing to be ready to check at a moment's notice and you're not standing quite as close to guys as you would in Muay Thai or something like that because you're worried about the takedown or just being clinched and pushed. I think the times when it's appropriate are more limited. I mean, generally in MMA, you have to cover a lot more distance striking anyway because the guy will run a mile anytime you show anything. So you've got to learn to cover ground in a way that you wouldn't have to against a very good kickboxer in a kickboxing match. Anyway, cheers, Jack. Right, let's do some previews for the weekend. Fight Night Glasgow, surprisingly decent card. You got Gunnar Nelson versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. Ponzinibbio, a guy I've never heard of. Let's just check his record. I don't know if Gunner's being propped up here. Guys do complain about Gunnar Nelson getting a lot of favours because he's from the SBGI, but Gunnar ended up in the UFC before Conor McGregor. He was very much a standout prospect, and there seems to be a bit of backlash against him where guys are like, he's a gatekeeper, blah blah blah. He has a lot of very interesting skills, and his grappling is very high level. His striking is very interesting. He's just had a lot of different problems with different opponents, so he's got a lot of growing to do, but his basic skill set is enough to deal with most guys who are of a good level, or even a pretty good level in the UFC. Okay, so this guy got knocked out by Lawrence Larkin, but then he's had a few good wins in the UFC. Okay, cool. Yep. Oh god, he's been in the UFC a while. I wonder why I've barely heard of this guy. Gunnar Nelson, you know what you're looking for. He's going to burst in with the right hand, karate style, and then he's going to take you down, probably with the punch and clutch, Fedor look, and then he's going to get on top of you and try and pound you, and then probably when there's like 30 seconds left in the round, he'll go to knee on belly and maybe try and guillotine you or something like that. Very clever guy, understands the length of rounds, doesn't go for submissions, or he'll flop to his back for a guillotine if he thinks he can finish it, but he really saves it for the last few seconds of the round when you know that if you fail the submission, you're only on the bottom for a little while. Very good at controlling top position and just elbowing the shit out of guys most of the time. Joanne Calderwood's on the card, obviously, she's Scottish, against Cynthia Calvillo, who everyone is on about at the moment. We were talking about step-up left kicks. That's one of Calderwood's main looks. Very difficult if you're not a very strong wrestler in MMA. That's where she's had a few of her problems. But she also uses that lead knee to block people from stepping in. She did that against Andrade. Leslie Smith, Cyborg's second best victory, is on the card. Neil Seery, I thought he was retired. Always going to be my boy for how he came in at short notice against Brad Pickett and made him look very average. Stevie Ray versus Paul Felder, that is surprisingly low down the card. I would say that is like main event material right there. Stevie Ray, obviously very good boxer, had that really interesting back and forth match with Joe Lozon in the last appearance he had. Struggled to contain Joe Lozon's brilliant guard passing, but kept pushing him back to guard. And then when he was on the feet, he managed to light Lozon up, started firing around Lozon's double forearm guard, and looking for body shots, which were really nice too. Paul Felder, big lightweight, and really strong kicks. Great intercepting knees. Don't know how much of a role that'll play against Stevie Ray, but then Stevie Ray likes to step in and box. Guys who like to step deep and punch, a little bit more reasonable to catch them with intercepting knees than it is to say, catch a guy who likes to stay on the outside and kickbox. Danny Roberts, who you'll remember from fighting Mike Perry against Bobby Nash. Yeah, a few good ones here. Charlie Ward's getting a second go in the UFC despite his first fight being one of the least impressive performances in UFC history. But I do feel for Charlie Ward. Again, in the book Notorious, we covered all about the outrage in Ireland and the death of João Cavallo and things like that. Could be hard for Charlie Ward to get a fight now in like the Irish circuit outside the UFC, so I can understand calling in the favours to get him a fight in the UFC. He's just, he didn't look ready for it in his last fight. He was just sort of running and windmilling, and didn't really work out very well. But they got him a 4-2 opponent. He's 3-2, so it seems fair. And then you got Paul Craig the Bear Jew versus Khalil Roundtree, which sounds fun too. So not a bad card all in all. I would go and watch that, like I said, if it weren't so far away. Bellator is also doing something on the 14th, which has Derek Campos in the main event. Derek Campos, most famous for using a nodder to knock out Melvin Guillard in a fight that Melvin Guillard's team should have appealed, but they were too busy booking him into bare-knuckle matches with Jimmy Sweeney and matches against Chidi Njoku where he was dwarfed. So, just... Not a very smart team, those guys. Or at least they don't seem to care for their fighters' health very much. He's fighting Brandon Gertz. Don't know anything about Gertz. He's 14-6. Very weird main event. Joe Warren is the co-main against a 7-1 Steve Garcia. Kendall Groves on the card. And Rafael Lovato Jr. is taking his 6th fight against Mike Rhodes. So that'll be fun. If you don't know Rafael Lovato Jr., firstly, if you see any recent pictures of him, he has been hitting something very hard. But he's a legend in the BJJ world. I think he's one of the very few Americans to win the Mundials. Let me check. Yeah, it's BJ Penn, Drysdale, and Lovato. That's about it. Oh no, Michael Mushemi just won the last one. So you got 4 in there now. But yes, very slick guard passer, very good guard player. Trains with Salo and Zanjo Ribeiro. So you're getting that really strong basic foundation game. Really fun grappler to watch. So excited to see him take his MMA career on. He's 34 already, but he's fighting at like light. Oh no, he's a middleweight in MMA. So there's potential there. And the guy he's fighting against doesn't look like a no-hoper like some of these guys have been getting. But equally, they seem to have learned their lesson from the Aaron Pico thing, I hope. Anyway, that'll do us for previews this week. As I said, sign up to the Patreon if you haven't already. Pick up Notorious if you haven't already. And send your emails and questions to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. This has been a long episode of the Fights Gone By podcast. I love you. Peace out.